It's been a little warm here this last week, warm for early December. It's been in the 20s and the 30s. And so our snow has melted, and the oak trees still have leaves on them, which is quite amazing. People sit in the Chatterbox Cafe, and they talk about the weather, as they always do, but now they really have something to talk about. Green grass in December. Dorothy at the Chatterbox put a sign up on the wall above the malted milk machines. It said, coffee 50 cents, 1 hour, $1, all morning, $2, all day, $3. You can go home for lunch and come back. Ask about our weekly rates. The grass was green. Last Sunday was the first Sunday of Advent, and all of the people filing into the Lutheran church commented on it as they settled down in the pews. The church was full. And then they heard the choir out in the vestibule sing, "Wake, awake to news all thrilling, the watchman all the air is filling. Arise, Jerusalem, arise." And in came the choir, all 18 of them, down the aisle. It's a very peaceful, simple service on the first Sunday of Advent. They lit the one candle. The pastor looked happy. The choir was in good voice. He's lost some weight this fall. And then his wife went away for a week, went to Minneapolis to see movies and go to restaurants and hang out with her college friends, and had a great time, but also realized how much she missed him. So he looked like a very well-loved man as he stood up in the pulpit and announced that the creator of the universe had sent his son to earth in the form of a child in Galilee 2,000 years ago, and seemed actually to believe this himself. There was a little bit of a stir then during the announcements when he said that the Advent potluck dinner would begin immediately after church, and that everyone was invited, and everyone stiffened and looked around. They had not known about this. This came as a surprise to people. They looked down in their bulletin, and yes, indeed, it said, potluck dinner, prayer and silent medication to follow. They thought of Miss Samuelson, our secretary, and the mistakes that she's made in bulletins in the past. The outreach committee will go around and visit those who are not afflicted with any church. For those of you who have children and do not know it, there is nursery service provided during the worship service. Mrs. Bunsen had sprained her ankle. Let us hold up her leg in prayer. And let us also have prayers for those who are sick of our church and our community. Well, Miss Samuelson, the church secretary, who is a volunteer, as we keep reminding ourselves, had made another mistake and had forgot to put the notice of the potluck dinner in the bulletin the Sunday before. And so the pastor, whose wife had been out of town, had forgotten to say anything about it last week. And the potluck has always been held at the end of October in the past, and this was the first year it was being held the first Sunday of Advent. Well, people were a little taken aback. But they just let it pass. Some people thought maybe they should jump up and dash home and go make something quick. And these are Lutherans, you know, with a powerful sense of duty. These are people who are capable of lying awake at night, worrying about the Jell-O mold that they're going to take to their mother-in-law's the next day, and if they should maybe have made it of raspberry instead of lime, and if they should have put as much grated carrot in it as they did. They're capable of agonizing over it. These are people who clean out their houses in the fall and they're unable to throw things away because they look at things and they can imagine that somebody, somewhere, might find a use for this someday. And so it all goes back into the closet, all the old coat hangers and all of it. These are a dutiful people, but they thought, well, they'll just let it go. So the only people who brought anything for the potluck were the choir members. They had heard about the potluck dinner at choir rehearsal on Thursday night. They came, and Mrs. Markland told them all about the potluck and also announced that because the numbers in the choir have dwindled this year, she said, we're not going to do Handel's Messiah this year. Even in its abbreviated version, we're not going to do it as we have in the past. She could look out and see which members of the choir were crestfallen and which people were elated at the news that Handel's Messiah was off. And she looked at Mark Bunson, and he looked as if someone had just told him that they had decided not to put the red-hot coals under his fingernails after all. He was supposed to do the bass aria. Why do the nations so furiously rage together? So and he was so happy at the thought of not having to do that furiously. And then she looked at Gladys Anderson, and Gladys Anderson looked as if her dog had died. She looked as if her trip to Hawaii had been canceled, because she was going to get to do the contralto solo this year that Mrs. Stenerud has gotten to do for the last 5 years, even though Gladys Anderson is twice the singer that Mrs. Stenerud was. And she's been looking forward to this all year. She's been practicing this contralto solo. I know that my Redeemer liveth. Oh, she was absolutely heartbroken. She had been singing that aria for all week. In fact, she had been singing it on her way to choir rehearsal on Thursday evening. As she came down the road and she ran into the Raccoon, she was singing, I know that my Redeemer liveth. She has been driving her son's car. She gave him her car. He lives up in Fergus Falls, and his wife is expecting a baby. It would be Gladys's and her husband's first grandchild. So she sent the 96 Ford Taurus up there, and she took, in exchange, his little red Chevette. It's one of those old Chevettes with the rear-wheel drive, so it fishtails on ice. And she had loaded the trunk with gravel and rocks for traction. And now, in the last couple of weeks, she's heard this strange clunking sound from the rear axle. It could be the tie rod, the suspension, the bearings, she doesn't know what. She took it into Krebsbach Chevrolet, and they said they could fix it for $250. Well, the car is worth only $200. It's just a pile of junk, but it's all that she had to drive. The heater doesn't work very well at all, and they had to put in cardboard in front of the radiator to keep the coolant up to a high temperature. It's just a miserable, miserable car. And something's wrong with the carburetor, so you have to stomp on the gas pedal 20 times before the thing will start. She's not used to this car, and she was driving in towards town, and she saw the Raccoon come up on the road. With this warm weather, a lot of these animals have come out of hibernation, that had gone into hibernation. And the Raccoon looked dopey, and he looked sluggish, half asleep. She slowed down. The Raccoon crossed the road. She sped up, and then the Raccoon turned around and walked into the side of her car. She thought to herself, you really ought to stop and see if that animal needs help. She did not stop. She kept on driving. She said, you don't want to get involved with an injured raccoon. Either he's okay or he's not okay, but he's the only one who can take care of himself now. She kept on driving. She thought to herself, how can you let an animal lie there in the ditch and suffer like this? What sort of person are you? And she thought about calling her husband and having him go and see if the Raccoon was alive or dead. And then by then she'd forgotten exactly where in the road it was that she'd hit the Raccoon. And when she came to choir rehearsal and she heard that Handel's Messiah was off,